Newcastle upon Tyne, my hometown, the place where I belong. Modern Newcastle is a mini metropolis of diversity, hospitality, education, culture and passion. Newcastle of the 60s and 70s was very different. The area of Scotswood where our tale is based was a deprived area at the time, where children played in derelict houses and on railway tracks, and parents lived hand to mouth. You may have had your washing stolen from your line, but despite this, there was always a sense of community, and nobody expected their children would not be safe to play in the area.
All I ever saw was friendliness, homeliness. I could never say I had seen any reason for to give it the name that it did have.
As somebody who grew up in this area of England, I am very aware of the warm sense of community, which is why, again, we knew that everybody looked out for each other, and we didn't expect the children, or the bairns as we call them, not to be safe. That was until Mary Bell. Mary Bell was born in Newcastle upon Tyne on the 26th of May 1957. By the time she was 11 years old, she had committed one of the most notorious crimes in the United Kingdom's history. Mary was a product of a relationship between Betty Bell, a prostitute, and Billy Bell, a criminal who was eventually later charged with armed robbery. Mary was referred to as May and had a history of being a bully and choked other girls at school and tried to suffocate them with sand, so she did have a difficult history. On the day before her 11th birthday, Mary strangled little Martin Brown, a local boy of 4 years old, and he was in a derelict house. Martin's death was initially thought to be caused by an overdose of medication, as there was a medication bottle nearby. And later Mary was found to have drawn this in a picture at school illustrating the story. It's believed that Mary killed Martin alone, but following his death, she and a friend, Norma Joyce Bell, who wasn't related, she was a different Bell family, broke into a nursery. The school was ransacked and there were notes on the wall confessing to the murder of Martin Brown that contained expletives and also the phrase, "I murder so that I may come back." The police considered this a prank and nothing more at the time. Martin's mother, June Brown, was bothered by the girls. Mary knocked at her door and asked June if she could see Martin. And June explained, "Martin's gone. He's dead." And Mary said, "I know he's dead. I want to see what he looks like in his coffin." Of course, June was appalled and closed the door. 3-year-old Brian Howe was Mary's second victim. He was strangled on waste ground, previously known as the Tin Lizzie. To describe this to you, it was a pile of concrete blocks in which children would play. This time, after strangling little Brian, Mary carved an M into his stomach and used scissors to cut off some of his hair, scratch his legs and mutilate his genital area. Mary and Norma together offered to help Brian's sister look for him. Mary was later to have said that she wanted her to get a shock when she saw him. But Brian wasn't found then. Brian was found by the police around about 11 o'clock that evening. This time, the police could not determine little Brian Howe's death to be anything but murder, and they began to talk to the local children. When the children were being interviewed, Mary gave herself away and soon became a suspect. Detective Chief Inspector James Dobson said of Mary later that he remembered Mary Bell was standing in front of Howe's house when the coffin was brought out. I was, of course, watching her. And it was when I saw her there that I knew I did not dare risk another day. She stood there, laughing and rubbing her hands. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one. Mary made a statement to police, attempting to shift the blame onto Norma Bell. Norma had learning difficulties and was ultimately not charged with any crime. An excerpt from Mary's statement is what I'm going to read you now. I am going to read this in a northeast accent. Believe it or not, the accent that I normally speak in is toned down so that I can be understood. Norma says to Brian, "Are you coming here because there's a lady coming on the number 82 bus and she's got boxes of sweets and that?" We all got inside. Then Brian started to cry and Norma asked him if he had a sore throat. She started to squeeze his throat and he started to cry. She went, "This isn't where the lady comes. It's over there by them big blocks." We went over to the blocks and she says, "Oh, you'll have to lie down." So he lay down beside the blocks where he was found. Norma says, "Put your neck up." And he did. Then she got a hold of his neck and said, "Put it down." She started to feel up and down his neck. She squeezed it hard. You could tell it was hard because her fingertips were going white. Brian was struggling and I was pulling at her shoulders, but she went mad. I was pulling her chin up, but she screamed at me. By this time, she had banged Brian's head on some wood or corner of wood, and Brian was lying senseless. His face was all white and bluey, and his eyes were open. His lips were purplish and had all slaver on. It turned into something like fluff. Norma covered him up, and I said, "Norma, I've got nothing to do with this. I should tell on you, but I'll not." The same year the crimes were committed, Mary was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Mary displayed classic symptoms of psychopathy. Ever since, her identity has been protected and she was released from any detention in 1980 and has lived under pseudonyms ever since. Mary cried when she was found guilty. And Mary was sentenced at Newcastle Assizes, that we know as the Moot Hole, and she has lived all over the United Kingdom ever since. She now has a daughter and is said to be well adjusted to life. Of course, this is a sense of much distress to the families of Martin Brown and Brian Howe. A High Court battle had to be won to protect her and her daughter's anonymity. This put their anonymity in place forever, and it was called the Mary Bell Order. This was later used with the murderers of James Bulger. So Mary was said to display classic symptoms of psychopathy. But did she? This is for you to decide. Recent research has suggested that psychopaths are not made but born. They have a fundamental difference in their brains to the rest of us who aren't psychopaths. But people still believe that psychopaths are made. And if you look at Mary Bell's upbringing, independent accounts from family members say that Betty had more than once attempted to kill Mary. She fed her tablets that she shouldn't have been taking as sweets and pushed her out of a window. After the fall from the window, Mary had suffered brain damage. This was reported at the time of the fall. She also told an author that her mother involved her in her prostitution, and that as a result of that she was sexually abused. So was Mary born that way, or was she a product of her environment? It's also been said that brain injury can cause the same lack of empathy that is seen in psychopaths. I honestly don't know which one it would be, and all three are possible. So if Mary was born this way, then that's on Mary. Mary has been said to have still blamed Norma for the events, saying that if Norma hadn't been so weak, she wouldn't have been stronger. But who knows? If Mary was made, then why wasn't Betty Bell held more accountable for the deaths of these young boys? Mary was also left for long periods of time alone in the house, while Betty went to Glasgow in her job as a prostitute. Thank you for joining me. Please join me for the discussion on Sunday. And thanks again for 1,000 subscribers. You be as safe as you can be. Promise?